welcome everybody to episode, I'm kind of losing count. Are we on 12 or 13 now? We've been doing kind of 2 of these a week. There's a couple of weeks where we've been doing a panel instead of an episode. So it's been a huge amount of fun, a lot of learning for us as well. And we're kind of now in a rhythm with this. So welcome. Today we got 60 minutes and I'm going to introduce you to or recap with you the 5 dysfunctions of a team model and talk about the program that we run around that, where we actually run the 5 dysfunctions of a team program, which actually comes from the author, Patrick Lencioni, comes from his company in the US. It's a great program to run. And it's nice to do because it builds in lots of different modules depending on what some of the key issues are within the team. With that, the first question I've actually asked on poll everywhere, which some of you may have access while you're in the waiting room, is what to you are the characteristics of a high performing team? Now, if all goes to plan, we should start to see some of the characteristics you put in. Okay, good. High trust, high trust, results, collaboration, common purpose. Great. Collaboration, trust, effective communication, clear goal, process. Or someone's written, right man in right place. Surely you mean right person in right place. I know you know what I mean. So sometimes the wrong man is often the issue. So aligned goals, common goal, transparency. So look, I think one of the key words that's coming out there that's common is trust, self-driven. So that's over a course of an entire team. Interesting concept. Okay, a clear job description. Yeah, to a certain extent that can help with individual roles. Ready to engage. Strong leadership. Okay, really important as well. Collaboration. Don't have any shit in the team. I love that. I just love the simplicity of that. I can't remember his name now, but it might be the ex-CEO of Domino's Pizzas had a hiring policy which was simply no arseholes. And I really like that concept. And his feeling was, you might be the best person I've ever come across, but if you're an arsehole and you're going to come in and disrupt my teams, that's someone I don't want in my business. And that he actively hired and not hired against that policy as well. So I quite like that. And whether that's someone's put in twice or 2 people have put that in directly. No politics. Look, politics is something that's driven by ego and people trying to play games because they feel they need to put themselves in front of the team's objectives, whatever it might be. I'll be honest with you, it's a reason I can't work in a corporate environment anymore, and I have to work with a small little company like ours. Not that that's a problem, but I work with some of the world's biggest companies, and politics, and don't get me wrong, it wasn't rife in every department or every part of the business, but it only takes a couple of individuals to ruin your experience within that. And knowing that you've then got to put energy into playing a game or making sure that this person is spoken to before this person, otherwise they'll get upset, even though there's no necessarily good reason for it, that is extremely time consuming and energy draining. Okay, respect. I've seen a team as strong as its weakest link. Yeah, absolutely. But we can always strengthen that weak link as well. We don't have a Donald Trump in the team. Okay. Okay, I'm not going to comment on that. Listening to new ideas, align goals. All right, look, there's some really good stuff here. Transparency and accountability. Accountability is a critical piece to a successful team. A successful team is not one that just gets on and is a happy place to work. It's a team that delivers consistently and pushes and grows. And what they did last year is no longer the benchmark. That's the actual minimum. So it's about holding each other and yourself accountable. People are in it as team players. Okay, cool. Lots of yellow. All right, thank you. As we know, if anyone's familiar with our Jigsaw Discovery Tool program, I'll touch on it briefly today. But we need lots of every color, or at least a good balance of colors. You know, we talk about having in teams diversity, and yes, gender, race, religion, whatever you want to frame diversity. But for me, more importantly, potentially in all of that is thinking styles, a diversity in thinking styles. General S. Patton once said, if we're all thinking the same, then no one's thinking at all. So we want people to think differently, to come at a problem from different angles. And guess what we want to do? We want to rub up against each other. We want to create some conflicts, which is what I'm going to talk to you about today. Adaptability, good. And I could just probably stay on this page for the whole session, but I won't do. What I would ask you to do now is I'm gonna just take you to one more question, and please forgive me. It's not going to be on poll everywhere the whole time. I think I've only got 3 that I'm going to ask you to tap in today. But here's the second one. So we've talked about the characteristics of a high performing team. The next thing I'm going to ask you to do is to consider yourself, that self-reflection. That's essentially the analogy in my image there. Now, I'm going to ask you that question is, what do you want to be, or how do you want to be as part of a team? So once again, if I can just ask you to dive into that, I'm just going to check. It should automatically refresh when my screen does. Whoops. Yeah, okay. So what you'll see there now, maybe let me just check my refresh on here. Bear with me, caller. Okay, let's activate that one. There we go. So, and it's asking you that in one word, because I'm going to use the word cloud function here. So in one word, if you've got to put 2 words, don't put a space in between them. So how do you want to be? And please note, I've put be in massive capital letters because it's really important that we're not about what are we going to do, it's how we're going to be. So just, I'll let that come through for a couple of minutes. Okay, just quick refresh there. Okay, all right. So if you're not too sure, if you've never seen a word cloud, basically the bigger the word, the more often it has been inputted. So words like supportive have obviously been put on by a few people here. Okay, so team player, well done. You've hyphenated it to keep it in the same thing. So respected. So you want to be respected. Yeah, that's whoever's put. I've just seen a great one. Whoever's put to be respected, that's great. That is essentially, or should be, the result or the outcome of how you have been. So this question is really about how are you going to act, how are you going to behave, how are you going to show up, both consciously and consciously as part of the team. And how you show up and the perception you create will lead to whether people respect you or not. So maybe think about what are the behaviors that you'd like to put forward. And the same thing goes for trusted. Yep, trusted is something you can't just turn up and say, hey, trust me. It simply doesn't work like that. Trust, the way we usually understand it, is being able to predict behaviors of people based on what's done before. So I know that Ahmed is going to produce good work because he always has done in the past. I know that Sarah is going to deliver on this task because whenever I've given it to her before, she's always done the same thing. Within this model, I'm going to talk to you about a slightly different level of trust. I love this one. This is awesome. Collaborator, that's great. Inspiring, particularly, whether you're a leader or part of the team, that's a really important piece to be. You want to be heard. That's a really important part of being a team. Accountable, a challenger, active listener. The one that made me laugh is not the shitter. That's a fantastic mindset to bring to any environment when you're dealing with people. Okay, good listener, Tim. Okay, look, awesome. This is really good. I'm actually, if you, unless anyone objects, I don't know why you would. I'm going to download that one and keep hold of that. That's a great image, and that will still keep ticking over until we get to our next one. So look, this you might not have heard of this guy, and if you go into the world of sports, when you're talking about teams, there's a million different really good quotes that you'll be able to come across. I really like this one. This guy's, I mean, good grief. I mean, this man passed away before I was born. And I'm not necessarily a big Yankees or even a baseball fan, but I just came across this quote a few years ago, and I thought it was a really good analogy to building teams. And what he's saying is that obviously there is getting good players is easy. So in our world, recruiting the right people, the people with the best attitudes, the best set of skills, the people that we believe have got the most potential and the ability to train those people, that's easy. It's actually getting them to work together on his team, in his sport, getting them to play together is the hard part. And it's interesting, if you do follow a sport, a team sport, and then you look at any team, you might have some of the best players in the world, but it doesn't always click for whatever reason that is. And once again, that there's a whole number of reasons that could be behind that. It could be ego. It could be the way that the manager has set the team up. There could be a whole range of issues behind that. And what we're going to do is going to explore some of those issues that are set out in Patrick Lencioni's book, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And it's a really nice way of thinking about and addressing teamwork. So Okay, so those of you that are familiar with this model, great. Those of you who aren't, no problem at all. Either way, if you're involved in particularly leading a team, I highly recommend, if you haven't done so already, grabbing a copy of his book, which is The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. It's available on Audible, so I know it's an audio format as well, and it's a nice, easy one to read. His model essentially elicits 5 levels of teamwork, or 5 behaviors. Now, he builds it as a pyramid because essentially the idea is that without the foundation, then the next level above is much more difficult to achieve. Now, because it's not a physical pyramid, you can absolutely have level 5, but still have poor results on level 1. But the way he spoke about his model is, first of all, level 1 is an absence of trust. So please bear in mind, he's used the negative flip to this. So teams that are not functional, dysfunctional, teams that aren't high performing, the teams that don't achieve, one of the foundations that are missing from them is this absence of trust. Now, when we talk about trust within the world of the 5 dysfunctions of a team, Lencioni actually referred to trust as vulnerability-based trust. So once again, it's slightly different to the definition I gave you earlier in terms of, I know Ahmed's going to do a good job because he always has done in the past. Vulnerability-based trust is being able to be in a room of people that you work with on a day-to-day basis and being comfortable and open about your vulnerabilities and your weaknesses and mistakes that you've made and owning those. Now, I guarantee that you've worked in teams before where you probably haven't felt safe owning up to that. That might have been down to one individual in the team. It might have been down to the entire organizational culture. But I'd also like to think, whether it's at work or in a social environment, you've also been involved in a team where you did feel that you could open up, that you could ask for support. You could go to people and say, I'm not too sure what I'm doing, or I've dropped the ball on this, I've made a mistake. So trust is really the crux of the model. Now, what that leads to is if we don't have high levels of trust, particularly where I can be vulnerable with my team, what that leads to is what we refer to as a fear of conflict. Now, I'm not talking about conflict where you're worried about that person jumping across the table and punching you in the face. It's just in terms of, I don't feel safe expressing my opinion. I don't feel safe challenging the ideas of the group. Now, you might be the only person out of a team of 9 people that isn't necessarily on board or fully agrees with the concepts that are being discussed or the project that's being discussed. Once again, if you don't feel that there's trust that exists in that room and you're going to be ostracized for your opinion, why on earth would you speak out? Now, teams that don't engage in healthy conflict don't actually get the best out of themselves. So we need to make sure that happens, okay? What that leads to then is a lack of commitment. I'd like to think that it's a shame that you have, but you probably have experienced this, where you've been in a team meeting, something's been discussed, maybe even a course of action has been laid down, everyone's been and nodding, and then you'll walk away from there and you'll go and grab a coffee with someone you trust, or if you're a smoker and you need to quit, of course, and you're in the smoking room, then it's a question of saying, well, that's never going to work. But why didn't we say that in the room? Well, we didn't say that in the room because we weren't comfortable with having the disagreements and the conflicts. And why did that happen? Well, because we don't feel that there is levels of trust that we could be open and vulnerable with. So that lack of commitment is where we start drawing down those concepts or those projects or those actions from the inside. We don't really, which leads to the next one, commit to it. What that leads to at level 4 then is an avoidance of accountability. So here what we're doing is people that are actually going ahead and doing actions that almost fly in the face of what the team agreed because they don't buy into it. They didn't feel either that they had their say or the course of action that's been chosen wasn't fully discussed and decided upon fully. So what we do is we say, well, you know, when it goes wrong or we don't deliver it, well, I told you that would happen. All right, not my fault. I tried to warn you. These are the kind of things that come out. And the top of the pyramid, the pinnacle, is an inattention to results. Now, teams that have this are obviously gonna fail. Now, inattention to results is often led by the fact that you have people essentially jumping around the other 4 levels, fighting for position, for status, playing off egos, often working to against the best interests of the organization to protect themselves, other people, or their department. I'm sure over the years you've heard people talking about working in silos, or, you know, classic ones, and you can choose any industry. Let's talk about the hotel industry. If you have something, front office, for example, and housekeeping, is the room ready? No, it's not ready. There's always clashes with these. But essentially, if we don't have those levels of trust and we can have open and honest, healthy conflict, and we can't commit to things, we will avoid getting things done and our results will suffer. So that's the model that Lencioni laid out. And if you ever read the book, it's quite a nice, easy book to read. It's written as a management or a leadership fable. So it tells the story of a tech company that brings on a CEO, and people don't think that she's the right person, but she puts into practice these 5 levels. And obviously it has a happy ending, but there's some really good learnings from it as well. So one thing that we do at Ignite when we run this, and we only run this for unique teams. So when we talk about teams, I'm not talking about work groups. So if you're a customer service team and you happen to be 11 people that do the same job, you're not necessarily a team in terms of the way we define a team. A team, a group of people that have different roles that contribute to the outcome of the team. So when we're working with teams, usually where we run this, we're running this with mid-management teams or senior leadership teams. It can be done at other levels, absolutely, but we need to make sure that we clearly define what we mean by team. Most people, when they think about let's say a sales team, well, that might be 10 people who go out and they sell the same product in the same way, but they just do it in different territories. But we're contributing the same skill set ideally, so not necessarily the best definition of a team in the sense we want to work on. When we do work with the teams, the first thing we always get people to do is take an assessment, and it's just run by Patrick Lencioni's company. There's 42 questions, and it's really cool. It gives you a really nice visual report that talks to you about the self-perception of the team against the levels. So it takes about 15 or 20 minutes to complete. And what we do is we then consolidate those results, and it gets then formulated into, this is a sample, it gets formulated into a chart like this, which uses a traffic light system, red, amber, green, or red, yellow, green. And it shows where these teams perceive their biggest dysfunctions to be. So if you would take this team, they feel that they, in terms of how the team are committed, they think they're good at that, and the way they focus on results, they think that's a focus for them as well. Trust is okay, so 100%, we could do some work there. But the big issues that they're facing is that conflict and accountability that are missing. So when we get that report back, for every team that we work with, we're then able to custom build a program to address those issues in a certain order. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to go on and straight away work with accountability and conflict. Maybe we'll go in and we'll do a couple of exercises around the stuff in green first, and we get a better understanding of how the team work. Then we can build some trust, and then we can work on the conflict and accountability. But what we can do with this is anything from a 4-hour to a 2-day program, and that 2 days doesn't have to be back to back. That can be over a period of time. But always, I recommend, ideally come and use us, of course, because I always recommend using an external agent to run this for your team. If you're an internal HR manager or internal L&D person, I've lived that life. And I know particularly when you're working with senior teams, you have to dance around that political element of, well, I'm potentially on the lower level down of a hierarchical chart, or you don't necessarily get the same level of buy-in, or you don't feel comfortable challenging those people. If you bring in someone like us in, we can actually 100% walk in, piss people off and walk away, and then you could just blame us. But ideally, the whole idea is that we can actually help that happen. We remove some of that red tape of being involved in the same organization. But whenever you do it yourself or whenever we do this, one thing that we always do, and not everyone does this, but I think it's an important thing to do, is to retest 6 months later. Is there an investment? Yes, but it's not a huge amount of money at all. We're talking like $50 a head. And to be able to measure your journey from start to finish, I think is immeasurable. And if you can see that you've moved the needle, and sometimes, I'll be honest, sometimes the moves the other way, particularly, with teams who are relatively new to each other. And if you're familiar with Bruce Tuckman's model of forming, storming, norming, and performing, I won't get into that one today. You might see a team at the beginning when they are coming together, they might come out like this. 6 months later, when they've actually got to a place where they're a little bit more comfortable to speak more openly, their scores might change. So it might be a little bit more open on trust, but maybe they don't feel people are committed. So that can happen. But most of the time we see a tick up in the right direction. So look, the kind of things that we work with, and I've kind of got about half an hour left to run through this with you, this is essentially what we do with the program. And once again, I'm not pitching our services here. I'm just trying to help you understand this. And if you want to run these yourselves, then so look, trust. So essentially, what we would do is we would get that report back, and then we would spend anywhere from a couple of days to a week or so planning that out. you know, with some of the people in the team to make sure that we're working on the right areas. But one of the things that we do in terms of building trust, and this is one thing that he recommends in his book, and I love doing this. I'll be honest, the first time I did this, I was really nervous because I thought that it was going to be quite intrusive and I wasn't too sure how I was going to handle some of the things that would come out of this. I'll be honest, it's one of my favorite things to do. And I even do it sometimes just as a rapport builder outside of this program. And it's what Patrick Lencioni in his book calls personal histories exercise. And you simply ask 3 questions. What I will tell you though, as the facilitator of this, you have to be very careful and very respectful. We don't probe, we don't comment, we don't even necessarily react to what comes out of this. So we ask 3 questions and we go around the room. And this, depending on the size of the team, can take anywhere from 15 minutes to maybe an hour if you've got a team of up to 10 people. But the important thing here is what we're doing is we're creating some history to help me understand you a little bit more, to help understand maybe why you like that. Why do you turn up the way you do? Or why do you show up some of the way you do? And a lot of it comes from some of these experiences that we'll ask people to share. So once again, I'll be honest, the first time I did this, I was really nervous and I really wasn't too sure how it was going to go. When I came out of it, we had people that were laughing, people in tears. It was an amazing emotional experience. And it's a very, very powerful thing to do, but you have to be very respectful and very careful with it. 3 things that we ask. The first thing, where did you grow up? Okay. Now, once again, you get a whole range of things from I grew up in this very town that I live in now, all the way through to my father was in the military. So every 18 months I moved somewhere else. Okay. Now, if you've got someone that you think is often quite gregarious, outgoing, and likes to get in people's faces, and you think, okay, now I understand that as a kid, you moved every 18 months. So you had to make new friends in new schools constantly. Does that tell me a little bit about how you are showing up today? And does that make me, and this is the key word, truly empathize with you a little bit more? Because I might not like the way you are, but if I start to understand you a little bit, empathy can drive a huge amount of trust here. Secondly, how many siblings do you have and where do you fall in the sibling order? So once again, there is the older child, middle child, younger child syndromes that kind of potentially exist in this. The other thing as well that will come out of this, very much like mine, is, well, I have 1 sister, I have 1 half brother, and I've got 2 step brothers, right? So then you start to get this different dynamic of how people's families were growing up. You might not relate to that at all. You might be an only child and your parents are still married and together. So those experiences, once again, are very different. So once again, do we start to understand people a little bit more? Now, the third question, and this is the one you have to be very careful with, and I also, you know, I do frame this to say, I'm not looking for anything deep or dark, just whatever comes out, comes out. We don't challenge it, or we don't say, is that it? Whatever comes out, comes out. And the third question, what's the most difficult, important, or unique challenge of your childhood? Now, look, I have had people, and it happens probably in at least every other group, that someone will turn around and go, nothing, because they focus on that word difficult. And that doesn't mean it has to be something dark. It could be the fact that, you know, they became a scout leader, you know, at the age of 15 or whatever it might be. And that was something they were proud of. That was a challenge for them. But, you know, we do actually have, and once again, the first time I went through this 15, 16 years ago when I was with AXA, my thing, what immediately I thought about was I was 11 years old, my parents got divorced. And that's something that for me was a pivotal moment in my childhood. And I do think it played out into how I was, certainly over the next 5 to 10 years. And that kind of led to where I am today. So that is something that you know, I expect to come out. You know, I have had all range of things from people, you know, losing parents as children, losing siblings as children. And it can be a very, very powerful, emotional, connected experience. I have people that feel that they didn't have a relationship with their mother or father, or they were rejected. It can be very emotional. That's why I'm saying to you, you're not a psychiatrist. We're not there to be psychiatrists. We're just there trying to understand people from a different point of view. Now, here's the thing. If you're worried about, well, I don't want to force someone to tell me something they don't want to tell me, I'll tell you now, if they're not comfortable telling you about their parents' divorce, they're not going to tell you. They will tell you something else. My exams were a tough time for me. I struggled at school, whatever it was. So if they get to a stage where they actually give you that, here's what you do. You literally look at them, listen carefully. I mean, properly listen to them. Don't comment, don't question it, say, thank you very much. Thank you. And then just move on. And that's all you do. And sometimes I just let a little bit of silence sit in the room, and it creates a really, really powerful atmosphere. Honestly, whenever I run this, when people leave that section, we usually have a break after this. I often see people get up and have hugs, and there is a much more connected feeling immediately.
So you still pause the share, yeah.
Okay.
There you go.
There we go. So the 3 questions: where did you grow up? And these are in the book, by the way. So if you buy the book, this exercise is laid out in the book. Where did you grow up? How many siblings do you have, and where do you fall in that order? And what's the most difficult or important or unique challenge of your childhood? Okay. If you're taking a picture of that, I apologize, I'm missing a question mark there. So my punctuality or punctuation itchiness is coming out. So yeah, so like I said, it's a very, very powerful exercise. And when we run this, it can sometimes, like I said, up to 45 minutes an hour. And we're not digging into things. We just want to kind of scratch the surface, and you'll only scratch the surface with things that people are comfortable talking about. If you turn around and you have someone in that room that just tells you something you think, wow, that's deep, then you know that you've got people into a really good place. And that, one thing I promise you, if you get one person do that, it sets a really strong tone for everybody else. Not they feel pressure to share, but it's like, wow, John just told us that's amazing. And it's amazing when they go for a break and say, okay, now I understand that. Now I understand why you ask me so many questions about this, or why you need all this information, or why you don't care for detail, whatever it might be. It really does help people understand each other. The next thing that Lencioni recommends is doing some kind of behavioral or personality assessment. Those of you that have worked with us, and someone mentioned the yellows before, we run a tool called the Jigsaw Discovery Tool. The reason that we run this is, over the years, I've run MBTI, I've run DISC, I've run Tetramap, I've run Social Styles, I've run Emergenetics. What else have I run? A whole range of tools. When I came across this one in 2012, 2013, it does the same thing. Essentially, you get the same kind of outputs, but it's the way it goes about doing it. It's completely unique, and I just fell in love with it. It is a really good immersive experience. There is no tick box assessment to it. We don't ask you to fill in a report and we give you a printout from a computer. It is, you build your profile in the program. And essentially, as all of these models do, it's all based on the work of Carl Jung. Essentially, along with a couple of other people, but it also has modern day neuroscientific research fed into it as well. And with Jung in his original work, which was published 99 years ago this year, what it establishes is 4 archetypal types, which are based on a couple of different axes of behavior, but I'm not going to bore you with those. But essentially, the 4 core profiles are often, with DISC, it's DISC if you're familiar with DISC. MBTI takes these 4 and breaks them down to another 4, so you get 16 types. But what we find is when people do MBTI, they go, okay, great, but often it can be a little bit too complex. The thing I like about Jigsaw is its simplicity, and people can use it straight away. So when someone said a lot of yellow, they're talking about that creative, that vivid imagination, always on the go, full of energy, generates excitement, which of course I think is the best one because that's me, right? But there is no such thing as a best one. All I'm telling you there is that I'm a human being and I have an unconscious bias towards my own preferences. They all have value. And the one thing we do is when we run this with teams is get people to understand, right, now you know a little bit more about each other's backgrounds and childhoods. Now let's talk about each other's preferences that are once again hardwired into you from a very early age. How can we now best speak to you when I understand you a little bit better? We always, when we talk to people about this, we use the expression, I'm sure you'll have a version in your own language, which is treat people how you want to be treated. And it's something that no matter where people come from in the world, they always have a version of that. And I'll often say, who taught you that? And the common answer is my mum or my dad. And we say, well, we love your mum and dad, but I'm going to tell you they're wrong. We want you to treat people how they want to be treated. It's not how you want to be treated, because how I want to be treated doesn't necessarily get the same results or the same level of influence for other people in the room as well. So in terms of building trust, what we do is we spend a lot of time helping people understand each other at kind of a little deeper level than just shaking hands and saying hello every morning. So there's 2 ways that we can do that. But essentially, key points for that, it is 100% this. It is at the heart of building a cohesive team, because without trust, you don't feel safe to challenge people, or you feel that you're going to be thrown under the bus at any time, you're not going to do your best work. You're going to exert a lot of energy kind of defending your position and kind of defending yourself from other people. Forget about that's a big bullet point there, but really the key word there is the vulnerability. That's the difference when we talk about trust within this program. We want people to be able to be comfortable sharing their weaknesses and their shortcomings. Building trust takes time. Simon Sinek, in one of his TED Talks, he says, you know, it is a feeling. You can't just say to someone, trust me, and they do. It is something that happens over a period of time. And what we can do with this program is we can accelerate the amount of time that takes. Doesn't mean that after 2 days on an offsite, you're going to walk away having, you know, the highest levels of trust ever, but we definitely lay the seeds for that to happen a lot quicker, okay? Now, it has to be maintained over time. I might trust my team, but it only takes 1 or 2 incidents of someone letting me down or letting the team down or not delivering where that trust can start to erode. So just because it's there, and this happens in personal relationships as well, just because trust exists doesn't mean it's always going to be there. So it has to be maintained and built upon over time. So as I said, once we have trust, we then can move into our next stage, which is healthy conflict. Now, once again, we're not talking about violence. It is literally this. Let me just jump to this one first. It is in this sense. Conflict by definition is any situation where your concerns or desires differ from those of another person or party. Now, some people really shy away from conflict and they're not comfortable with it. Some people lean into it sometimes far too easily. But conflict, you know, as I often said, well, not at the moment, maybe on Netflix, but I was going to say go to the cinema. You want to watch a comedy and your friend or husband or wife wants to watch a horror film. You have a slight difference in your desires there. That is a form of conflict. So what I'm going to ask you to do is to consider yourself and just jump into our poll here. And I'm going to ask you just to drop a pin onto this rating scale and tell me how comfortable are you with conflict. And as you can see, we've got a scale of 1 to 10 there, 1 being very uncomfortable and 10 being very comfortable. If I can ask you just to drop a pin somewhere on, oh, there we go. We can start seeing a few drop in as well. So I'll just give that a minute.
Ross, there was a question just for you to confirm, if you can confirm the name of the book.
The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. I'll show it up at the end.
Okay.
Cool.
I think they may have been looking for the author.
So his name is Patrick Lencioni.
Okay.
Lencioni. Took me a long time. I had to research a while ago how to pronounce his name because I'm not great with the Italian names. Is it Lenci? Anyway, Patrick Lencioni is how he says it, so I'll take it from the man himself. Okay. All right. Okay. So we've got quite a big range there within this group. Actually, Ben, I can't see. How many people have we got on the call at the moment?
83 if you take out me,
okay.
Kevin.
Okay, all right. So I mean, obviously, not everyone's dropping a pin in there at the moment. We've got a relative large range, ranging from 3, which is pretty uncomfortable with conflicts, right up to 10, where people are very comfortable, where it's almost potentially a default setting. So look, any extreme, I always just make sure that people are self-aware. If you're very comfortable with conflict, and once again, this is something else that Jigsaw or any of the tools like that would actually help with, is understanding where your levels of conflict or comfort are and how do they align with other people's comfort or levels of comfort with conflict as well. Okay, Ben, could you just mute yourself, my friend, because I just hear you tapping on your keyboard. Thank you. So look, once we understand a little bit about where we are and how we feel and how we react to conflicts, what we run, and once again, we've done this for a long time, but Patrick Lencioni established this or recommends in this book, we run something called the Thomas Kilmann conflict mode instrument. There's a couple of you I've seen on the call that we've run it for your organization, so you'll be familiar with it. And it essentially is a piece of research done by 2 guys, Thomas and Kilmann. It's not one person. And they have elicited 5 modes of conflict. Now, what they tell you is that there's 2 basic aspects of handling conflict. And those of you that went on a negotiation program that we ran a couple of weeks ago on this format, we use the same model for that as well. We just changed the words ever so slightly. on one axis, it's your assertiveness. So what we use in negotiation is your desire or your need for outcome. And then across the bottom, it's how cooperative you are, or your focus on relationships. And what they go on to say is that you have essentially, like anything like this, a default or a preferred way of dealing with conflict. Now, they tell you that your conflict mode is established by your skill in any area of that grid, plus the situation you are facing. So if you are someone that has low cooperativeness and high outcome, then your behaviors might be perceived as other people as being quite aggressive. You might be someone that's just dropped the pin in number 10 up there. I don't know. But if, for example, you're in a situation that requires you to have high cooperativeness and low assertiveness, because you haven't used that so much, your skill levels are less, simply because you haven't practiced enough. So you're not necessarily as good as dealing with the conflict in that environment. So what they did is they laid out these 5 modes, and they're relatively easy to understand. And what we do is particularly when we're allowed to be in the same room as people, is we'll have a massive grid marked out on the floor with tape, and we get people to step into this. So at the bottom, we have what they refer to as avoiding. So I don't need to lean into this. I don't need to get into conflict or disagreement. There's no energy that I need to expel for me and my team or organization. Up here, this is where it's about me. I need to win, and I'm going to get what I want out of this. So this is where you might have someone where you don't care for the relationship. There's nothing in it for you long term. And that might be your default setting. Across the top, we have collaborating, and everyone goes, yes, this is where we want to be as human beings. It's all about making sure we all get the outcome, and we all are cooperative, and we all skip off over to, or over the hill into the sunset, making sure that we've all got what we want. Great, but it doesn't always need to be collaborative. When you're collaborative versus competing, it can take a lot more time interrelating issues and discussing things. So it can take more time and energy. And some situations, you simply don't need it, okay? Down on the right-hand side, then we have people that have high focus on the relationship and low on the outcome. So we're accommodating of other people. And once again, this is where people just tend to give up and hand over, say, look, I'd rather not get into conflict, so that's fine, we'll watch the horror movie. Now in the middle, and once again, with the negotiation model, we always say, try and avoid this, because it means that you're not really committing anywhere. Is what we most of the time do is we compromise. You know, I get a bit of what I want, you get a bit of what you want, but we don't necessarily get what we need. Now, the thing about the TKI is we'll run the assessment, you'll identify where your natural preference is, and then we'll help you lift your skill sets in the other 4 areas that we have on the board. The fact of the matter is, it's about the situation. You want to choose the right mode for the situation. And in order to be able to deliver that, you need to be skillful in all of them. You will have more skill and more abilities in some of them than the others, but you'll need to be more conscious. So for example, for me, one thing that I really struggle with is the competing, right? I don't mind getting competitive, but for me, other people is quite a big focus. So when I need to go there, it often feels quite uncomfortable for me. But if I'm aware of the reasons behind that, I can do it. But I have to really think about everything I'm doing and saying in that moment.
Chris, you do have a question relevant to this. Somebody's asking, what do you do when you have the right solution, but the team, the person doesn't take you seriously, therefore does not take your view into consideration?
Okay, I kind of need to ask a secondary question to that. Are you the team leader, or are you part of the team?
Taj?
He said part of the team.
Part of the team, okay. So look, here's the thing, Taj. Thanks for the question. Ben, what I would say, just any other questions, just hold them to the end, mate, because otherwise I might just run out of time. With this, it's an interesting one. If you're the team leader, sometimes you're going to have to make a decision, right? The key to this in a team where you've got a lot of trust, if it's an important decision, people will feel that they've been listened to. Now, as the leader, particularly in a trusting environment, you've got to be prepared to make an unpopular decision. You've also got to be prepared to make a decision that you know might be wrong. So it's important that you at least make some decisions. A decision is better than no decision. We know that. Now, if you're part of the team, now it's difficult to, you know, I mean, your question was, you know, I know I've got the right solution. You know, my question would be, how do you know that? You know, if you've got data, facts, proof, then and you're presenting that to the team and they're still not listening to you, then that's quite a difficult place to be. But I think in a healthy team, and what we're trying to drive through this program, is that you can have a team environment where everyone's opinions are listened to and as valid as anybody else's. Now, if you're in a situation where that's not happening, I would suggest that your team isn't necessarily one that's highly functional, that there might be some issues around trust or the ability to enter into conflict around that. Now, if you believe you've got the right decision, and once again, you can often back that up. And even if it's just a gut feeling that you can base it on something, maybe even going even to the team leader and having that conversation directly with them might be the way to go. But without knowing a little bit more about your specific scenario, I can't give you that kind of golden nugget of an answer, if one even does exist. If there's a follow-up to that, Ben, if you just hold it for me at the end. Cool, thanks, because I've got 3 more to get through. So look, mastering conflict. Once again, it does require trust. If I don't feel safe with you, I'm probably not going to lean into conflict with you. And that goes for most people. And by the way, if I have a preference to lean into conflict and that other person or that team doesn't trust me, once again, we're still in the same place. It will sometimes be uncomfortable. And for a lot of people, it is always uncomfortable. And the biggest piece of advice I can give you with anything like this is get comfortable with the uncomfortable. You know, it is getting outside of your circle of comfort. So this, once again, maybe this comes into Taj's piece here, but must discuss and clarify conflict norms. One thing that we do, and I covered it on one of the webinars we did, is we get teams to create a team charter. And one of the questions we put on that team charter is, how do we address and resolve conflict? So up front, with no big conflict issue on the table, teams discuss how they're going to address it. So if, when you come to a real situation where there is a disagreement or differing of an opinion, you can then refer to this charter that we like to then blow up and stick on the wall and say, hey, when we said that we were going to address conflicts, we said everyone would have their say. Some teams say everyone gets 30 seconds to speak and no one else can have an opinion until all opinions are on the table. Whatever framework you set out, but make sure that happens up front. Once again, if you have, and I'll use the term carefully, a fear or a discomfort around conflict, it shouldn't get in the way of debate, okay? If you have that issue and and it is a feeling that you don't feel comfortable disagreeing with somebody in the team, even if it's the leader of that team, then that's something, once again, we need to make sure that we can get over, because what we're doing is trying to elicit good debate and good conversation, okay? Next, we then hit commitment. So we've got trust, good conflict in place. So we've got healthy decisions coming out. Now we're more committed. And really, because of the time, I just dropped down on this one. But really what we're looking to do is that we don't have to get our way. So with Taj there, for example, the other piece I would say to you is, if you're adamant that your decision is the right way to go, and that's the, you know, and you can't believe, maybe you're pulling your hair out that the team aren't doing this, you've got to understand that, you know, sometimes I just need to take a step back for that and say, it's okay. You know, it's almost like not harboring any resentment they didn't listen to you. And as and when it comes to come out to play that your decision or your idea was the best one and the way they went didn't work, not to sit there and go, ha, I told you so, and give people a hard time about it. And say, look, I'm glad we went that way, and I'm glad we've learned from it. This was the idea I originally had. Can we come back to looking at this? So once again, making sure that happens, okay? We can 100% get behind a decision without knowing it's correct. Sometimes there's going to be things that you're going to decide on that you don't have evidence or data from. And here's the nice thing to do is, when you're doing this, is sometimes make a decision on something that is quite innocuous, that doesn't have a lot riding on it. And what teams have found when they've actually created research and studies on this is, when they make a decision without doing a huge amount of analysis and data and research, they get to their decision obviously quicker. But then what they find is that the decision they made is actually not too different from the decision they would have made if they'd have spent a long time examining the data. So obviously, I'm not just saying ignore data and make a decision willy-nilly. What I'm saying to you is that there are some occasions where maybe that decision isn't going to have a massive negative impact if it doesn't work out. Get the decision made. Get people moving in the right direction, okay? And if we come back to trust once again, if I know I can make a decision and put something into action and it goes wrong, I'm not going to be castigated by the rest of my team and my colleague over that. That's a really important part of this as well. This is why the pyramid model plays in really, really nicely. So once again, it requires clarity and buy-in. Now, in order to get buy-in truly with these kind of decisions and these conversations, you don't get people to buy in, you get people to weigh in. And that means everyone gets a say, everyone gets their voice heard. And whether their voice is disregarded, it is respected. And no one's going to sit there and go, oh, Kevin, that's a ridiculous idea, shut up. Because guess what Kevin's never going to do again? He's never going to open his mouth in that team, okay? I picked on you, Kevin, purely because you're the name at the top of my screen. So don't. And also because I like to think we have a trusting relationship, right? Yeah. So once again, it assumes almost to a point and requires that we avoid assumptions and that we remove as much ambiguity as we can as possible. But that ambiguity will exist most of the time, particularly if you're making a future-based decision and you're not too sure how it's going to play out. So some uncertainty will always exist. Okay. The last critical thing as well. Look, when we run a decision-making program, we run an exercise on consensus decision-making, and people then understand if you're going to get 10 people on a team to all agree, it takes a huge amount of effort. And this is why when you have, for example, juries in legal systems where they say it has to be a consensus decision, that means all 12 people on the jury have to agree. You know, when you look at the amount of time those juries deliberate for, it's often 20, 30, 40% longer than when a jury needs to make a unanimous decision, because getting everyone on the same page is really difficult. And what you'll always get is that potentially that maybe last 1 or 2 people, they might agree to it, but they don't really agree to it. But the thing about these kind of decisions is make sure, even if that person, let's say Taj, his examples or his ideas are not being put into practice, that he is thanked and his voices are listened to and respected. What we're going to do is just say, look, Taj, thanks very much. I really appreciate bringing this to the table. Given all the factors at play, we're going to go with this. So I really appreciate your input, but it's really important that we have you as part of the team because we can't do it without you. Is that okay? And really what we're looking to do is for Taj to actually feel, yeah, okay, fine. I'm going to dive into this and I'm fully going to commit to this, irrelevant of it being my decision or not. So once again, if we have that commitment, we then get people who are much more accountable. And more importantly, because we have trust and open and honest conflict, who are comfortable holding each other accountable. So even if like yesterday, I had a really bad day yesterday. I put like 8 things on my to-do list and I did 1 of them. If anyone's interested, look at my Instagram, you'll see me swearing a lot, trying to do a video and about 50 outtakes. And that kind of just ruined my day. But it's one of those things where I'll step up, you know, in my team meeting this morning and say, I'm sorry, I didn't get anything done. I've let myself down to a certain extent. But also, once again, I'm not going to give myself a hard time about that. I'll catch up. But I want everyone in my team, even though I might be the leader of that team, to 100% hold me accountable. I want to be questioned when I don't deliver on what I've said I'm going to deliver on. Because if I'm not doing that, how am I expecting, you know, my team to do the same when I'm holding them accountable and each other? Okay. So look, once again, key points on this very quickly. It happens directly among peers. Accountability, the perception is often it's leader down to people in the team. No, it has to happen across the board. Now, if any of you are familiar with, you know, agile working, particularly when you talk about Scrum methodology, that's one of the key drivers of Scrum is everyone's work is visible and everyone is accountable to each other. And that doesn't mean I turn around in a meeting and go, why the didn't you do that? It's because once again, I have conflict. I have trust in my team and I have open conflict. And I can just say, you know, I needed that, or that was supposed to be done by 6 o'clock yesterday. What happened? You know, and once again, I'm going to then get into a place where my team are going to come to me preemptively so we can avoid that. Peer pressure and the distaste of letting down a colleague motivate people better than the fear of punishment or rebuke. So if you think about that, what we're talking about is we want to be seen as good people. So that question I asked you at the beginning, how do you want to be when you're in a team? That's what that drives to. We want to be seen as people that are good at our job, that we deliver, that we're consistent, that we're reliable. It's not a question of saying, I'm going to do this, otherwise I'm going to get a smack on the head or I might lose my job or get a warning. I want to do this because I want to be perceived as someone that's good at my job. And look, whether you are good at your job is another thing, and it's also a subjective thing. But if you know when you get up in the morning and your feet hit the floor, your intention is to be the best version of yourself, both for yourself and your team, that's all we can ask for. Now, once again, it's an interesting word there, the culture of accountability, because there are some teams or organizations I work with where you'll see pockets of it in teams, but it's not across the organization. And that often comes from the team leaders or certain managers in there that actually don't have a leadership style that doesn't necessarily do that and embrace accountability. So once again, the leader must be willing to be accountable themselves and must be willing to lean in and confront those difficult issues. Now, guess what? I'm going to bore you now. If I've got good levels of trust and I know that my team are open to conflict and I can hold people accountable to their commitment, that's easier for me to do then. Okay. Now, the last thing is this results. And as you know, any team that exists within an organization only exists to produce results. Okay. It might be anything from financial reports to putting revenue on the board for a sales team, or like I said, changing the sheets in a hotel room. But those results must happen. Okay. Now, if we can put all these 4 steps into place, the results, I'm not going to say that they're just going to happen automatically, but they're easier to come by. Okay. So when we're focused on results, what we're looking to do is get basically the whole team to accomplish what it sets out to achieve. Now, one thing that we'll do in this is we'll set what's referred to in his book as a thematic goal. So it's a goal that has a theme, usually attached or directly connected to the company's strategy or something that department needs to deliver that year. We get everybody behind that. And once again, now if we've got trusting teams with a shared goal, shared vision, and we know that we've got each other's backs and we're accountable to each other, that's when you start seeing some velocity happen, okay? Everyone must make the team's results a priority. Now, once again, let me just speak to Scrum. If you're familiar with a basic Scrum board, it is a wall or a whiteboard that's covered in Post-it notes. And those Post-it notes are tasks, and each task is put up. And if I put a Post-it note up at the beginning of what's called a sprint, that's mine. I own that. So I've got to put that job as a priority. Nothing else can get in my way, okay? Now, my job as a team leader is to make sure I'm removing barriers for people as much as possible. And this is where we then lean into that whole servant leadership mindset. What can I do for you to make your job easier, to make you more efficient? And I'm going to remove those barriers and blockers out of your way. You've also got to clarify publicly, and this is a really important piece, is desired results and keep them visible. Stick it on the wall, stick it on the board, even to other teams. If you feel that I don't want to tell other teams what we're doing because if we miss our goals, then we're going to be embarrassed and we're going to be made to look silly. I promise you, the more public your commitments are, the much more likely you are to deliver on them. Okay, it's one thing writing a goal down and stick it in your wallet so every time you open it you see it. There's another thing of sticking it on the wall and telling people what you're going to achieve. Sales teams are great for this. They might have a thermometer or a big chart that they fill in as they go through, but it's a really important piece to make sure that we know, for example, that's our revenue figure this year. And if halfway through the year we're only 25%, the whole company can look at that and go, we're behind, right? Now, if you've got a good culture in your organization, other people are going to start looking at that and going, okay, what can I do to make that happen? Because if sales fail, then finance fails, then marketing fails, then HR fails. It's not just about one team achieving its goals, it's about the organization. So look, what I would say is when we often go into these programs and we're running this, you'll have people that in that classic comfort zone, but getting them out of the comfort zone is a really important part of that. And that's why when we run these programs for the first time, irrelevant of how they've scored, I'll always do activities on trust and maybe just do 1 or 2 things. It might just be the first hour because I want to get people, one, to expand their comfort zone, but also to get out of it. And this is why I love that image, because essentially that's where the magic happens. That's where growth happens. That's where change happens. And that's where your comfort zone then grows, okay? Now our job or our skill as facilitators is knowing where comfort zone is, growth zone, and then the burnout zone, and making sure that we keep people, close to that line, but not going into that. So last thing before I wrap up, I'll just activate this page, and this is where I'll ask you for our feedback that we do on every one of these programs. But I'll also, once again, come to the next piece that's activated now, so it'll stay live. And I'll open up the floor to questions. It's 11:01. So Ben, is there any other questions that you've had come through?
No, there's no other questions, just apart from Taj's, and we covered off the book. I believe there's one there's just more of a comment in the chat if you want to have a look at it. It's a pretty...
Do you want to read it out, or is it?
I believe... Yeah, have a look at
it. Sounds very cloak and dagger. Doesn't sound like we've got high levels of trust here. Hang on a sec. Okay. I just need to stop that 1 second. Okay. Whereabouts?
Renuka right at the end.
Okay, yes. I mean, coaches give companies, it helps things like that. Push people to competitive and block communication, so help them maintain a balance, ensure there's growth. On an individual level, employees come together as a clan. Adultcy culture, a few cultures good for company. Interesting. Yeah, so I mean, everyone can see it, but it says, I believe a adocracy culture or a mix of that with a few other cultures is good for any company as it helps teams survive and adapt. Correct me if I'm wrong. It's always the attitude to bring to anything. However, that can also push people to be competitive and block communication. So how can one maintain the balance to ensure that there is growth on an individual level and employees come together as a clan? But the interesting thing is as we go through the process of even education as you go into your careers, it's quite often the case that we're almost trained, so to speak, to be competitive with people around us, right? So I've got to move people out of my way so I can be at the front of the queue. And that doesn't actually have to be the case when you've actually got a team that works, well. So, a culture of adocracy, this is, for those of you that don't know what that means, it's kind of where an organization is flexible, essentially, where there is a little bit more flexibility to a management culture rather than having a rigid structure in place. And look, I think, honestly, I'm getting into a little bit about kind of my own personal opinions here, but I think what we're starting to get into now is that whole rigid management structure of hierarchical pyramids, I think is a little bit outdated, honestly. I mean, just look what's happened in the last 6 to 8 weeks with companies having to go agile and working from home. The removal and the move towards what's commonly referred to as a flat organization where there is less hierarchical structure, I think is the way to go. I think there's going to be much more need for working as teams and coalition across departments and what was often referred to as silos than being the autocratic, I'm the leader, that you're going to do as I say. I think it's really important to have that. But, once again, if I'm just trying to kind of layer your whole piece there, because it's, yeah, I think if it's done properly and you have that culture in place and you build high levels of trust, which for me is the absolute core of everything in this, which is once again why I love this model, because it's at the foundation. I think if you have that, and I think that people understand that they're always acting in the best interest of everybody, I think you move away a little bit from that competitive environment. I think, if we get to a stage where I know that if I hide my inadequacies, one, I'm not going to grow as an individual, but more importantly, the company doesn't grow, my department doesn't grow. What that means, if I'm going to be completely selfish and competitive about it, is that my chances for growth, my chances for promotion, my chances for learning new things, they all diminish with that as well. So I think the culture of adocracy is an important one. And I think it's something that you will see in more and more organizations as we move forward. I think, it's not dead. Of course, there's still organizations that operate that are very hierarchical. Some of them need to be, based on their industry. But I think more and more you'll see organizations move to more flat structures where there's more flexibility within there. So I think to make sure that you're maintaining the balance is, once again, I always say, look, everything starts with self. And if I'll just bore you with my own kind of mindset as a trainer or training manager or whatever I've done in my career, I'll have people, I remember being I won't name the company, I remember being a training manager in the UAE, large international company, and people coming to me and saying, someone in my team needs to learn presentation skills. And my first question was always, okay, why? What's he going to add to their job? And then more importantly, what have they done so far? And people say, what do you mean? Okay, well, so you want to learn something, whether it's leadership, presentation skills, you want to learn about finance. What have you done to learn that yourself? I don't mind putting you on a training course or creating something for you, but I want to know that you're bringing the right attitude to it. Same with managers as well. People come to me and say, oh, I need leadership program. Okay, great. You recognize you've got a problem. What do you need to do? What do you need to do? What have you done so already? So I think the growth mindset comes from the individual, first of all. And I think if you are someone that is going to be in an organization like this, that has that flexibility, I think more and more in the future, organizations will be hiring for people who have a growth mindset about looking to push the boundaries for themselves as an individual. And once again, I think if we know that I know that when I'm working with my team, that we're all operating and working and growing and developing in the best interest of the organization. That's for me how we come together. Now, you might have to go back and watch that again when we put the video on YouTube, because I know I waffled a bit there. I was just trying to get my thoughts in place. Okay. Thank you very much. I see a few people jumping out of the call. I see Ben's taken over the screen. I think he's trying to show you our upcoming webinars here. So and that's it, team. Thank you very much for those of you who stayed, because I know once again we've gone over by, well, 9 minutes exactly. But I wish you all the best. Have a great week as always. Keep washing your hands, stay safe, and we'll see you down the road. Thank you very much.